Okay. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through this Transcendentalism project so that you will know what the expectations are, um, even if you weren't present in class. So this first sheet that I have open is just the actual project assignment, and it starts off with what are the steps. So step one, step two, you're going to read an article and an infographic about the tiny house movement. Sorry about that. And then those things are going to inform you about the tiny house movement and how they're similar to the Transcendentalists. So that's going to be important because that's really our goal here, is looking at how modern times have been influenced still by the Transcendentalists and their movement. So we'll start with that, and then you're going to write a synthesis paragraph where you're going to use that article and infographic, and you're going to use Emerson and Thoreau text from class, and then you're going to tie their ideas together. So that paragraph will look something like this. You'll have a main idea. Your thesis will be your first sentence of that paragraph, and it'll be something like, the Transcendentalist and the tiny house movement share many things in common, or whatever, because your whole paragraph, right, is going to focus on the values that the two had in common. And then you're going to have to sandwich your quotes. We're going to talk about sandwiching quotes briefly soon, where you're pulling together quotes from both sources into the same paragraph. And I can show you one of those in just a minute when we get to the example that I have for you guys. But you're going to say, hey, they have a lot in common. And then you're like, hey, the Thoreau said this, and the tiny house movement does this. So they're the same because blah, 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 right? That's going to be your explanation. And then you're like, also, Emerson said such and such, while the tiny house movement article says this proves that blah, 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 right? You're going to do that 3 times, one of each quote, one for each of your pieces of evidence. You're going to have 3 different things that they had in common. And then that's the end of your synthesis paragraph. So I'm going to show you what one of those synthesis paragraph looks like before we move on to our next step. So here's the paragraph. So this is a 4. So if you want full points, that paragraph is going to need to be chunky, right? This is going to be a chunky paragraph. Now, I'm not doing this with tiny house movement because I don't want you to steal my answers. So my example is using a song, and I'm showing how this song and the Transcendentalist relate. So we're going to start here with the first sentence of this paragraph being my thesis, right? Although it was released in 2004, Natasha Bedingfield's song Unwritten clearly illustrates the transcendental tenets of acting with nonconformity, embracing individual experience, and living life to the fullest, right? So I've pulled both tenets and value or overarching concepts. Both of those are in my thesis. Now I need one of those sandwich quotes. So I'm going to highlight my sandwich quote so that you can see that I have quotes from both of these things together. So let's take that. In Self-Reliance, so I'm telling you where it came from, Ralph Waldo Emerson, a transcendentalist, states that a man must be a nonconformist. And similarly, Natasha Bedingfield sings that she breaks tradition. There's one quote, breaks tradition as part of the song, and lives, here's the other part of her song, outside the lines. Now, if we were citing this because we're citing our sources, Self-Reliance is already cited right here. I know where the Emerson quote came from. The Natasha Bedingfield song, I know also that this is her line, so I don't have to cite it. But if we were doing our sources, like source 1 or source 2, you would put that at the end of this particular quote. So I'm showing, hey, like, look, they're both nonconformists. So then here's my explanation. While Emerson shows how nonconformity is essential to being a transcendentalist, Bedingfield demonstrates how she is following Emerson's example by doing things differently from others and not being afraid to be outside the lines of what is considered successful by society. So there's my explanation. Notice that my explanation is chunkier than either of my quotes together, right? All right. Furthermore, in that same essay, Emerson says, so I know where it came from Self-Reliance, says to trust thyself. That's his quote. And then here's another part of it, because great men have always done so. And similarly, Bedingfield also trusts her own personal experience, like the transcendentalist, when she says, no one else can feel it for you. So again, we have a sandwich quote where we have Emerson's quote and Bedingfield's quote together. So that's a big old chunky sentence. I do have a comma and a fanboy here to make sure that this is not a run-on sentence. And then we do the same thing. We explain how they're similar, etc. You do that 3 times for each of your 3 ideas. So if I scroll down, you'll notice this is a score of a 3. It does still have quotes, right? They're not sandwiched together, but there are quotes. And it looks like they have 2 different quotes here, right, for each thing. One from, so there's only 2 pieces of evidence instead of the 3. And you notice the explanation is not as strong. So that's a 4. This is a 3. So this is an A. This is a B or a C. This is a 2. That's like a 50, 60. And then this is a 1. That's like 50 and below. So just so you know what those look like and what the expectations are in order for you to get the full points. So I'm going to back out back towards my assignment. And if I go here, your step 3 is you're going to design a tiny house community brochure based on transcendental tenants. So basically, your ideal customers are the transcendentalists. So you should be marketing to the transcendentalists. So I'm going to give you an example of what one of those looks like in just a second. I'm going to have that working here at opening so that we can be pulling those ideas as well to show you what my expectations are. But that is also part of your rubric, is having that brochure, having it appropriate for your audience and the task. And then finally, you're going to write a 1 to 2 paragraph explanation that explains how your brochure specifically relates to the transcendental concepts and tenets. So the dinos and all of those sentences, like humans are inherently good, spirituality comes from self, society is corrupting, etc. And then all 4 things will need to be submitted as like a Google Slides presentation or a Canva presentation. I'm going to show you one of those here shortly as it opens. So I'm opening my, while we're waiting for that to open, I'm going to go ahead and pop over here to my rubric. So you get 15 points for that brochure being meaningful. It has originality. You're clearly advertising to a specific community. It has a unique and original name, and it's clearly relevant to the transcendentalists and the tiny house movement. So it's doing both movements. The evidence is really that the evidence from the brochure is cited to support the claims of the brochure aligning. So this is 25 points to show that your brochure, your paragraphs about the brochure line up with transcendental tenets. The explanations this is your tying it to the tiny house movement. So this is you explaining in your paragraph how the tiny house movement, etc., is tied to the transcendentalists. Okay, and then finally, you have requirements. So you have a brochure, you have a paragraph about the tiny house movement, you have a paragraph about your brochure and how it's transcendental, and then everything is clean, clear, aesthetically pleasing. It could be a brochure that I put out today. And then, of course, 10 points for grammar. Nobody wants to go be part of a community, no matter how great it sounds, if the grammar is wrong, because it's going to look like you don't know what you're doing. So here's my example. Here's one of my examples. It's still kind of loading here. I'm going to make this into the slideshow so you can see it big. Now, I made mine super basic for a reason. And mine is basic because I'm trying not to give you too many ideas or take any ideas. I want you to be original on your own. I called it Walden Village because I'm trying to be transcendentalist. And I give a little sneak peek here about what it's like to live in our community. I have a couple of pictures. I make up an address and a website, etc. And there are 60 homes in this tiny house community. So our next slide, if it'll let me go there. Oops, go up one more. That's an example of our explanations. Here's some pictures of what it might look on the inside, that little tiny house. This is kind of big for a tiny house, if you want me to be honest. They might get dinged for that. These are clearly tiny houses that are together. Look, it looks like they have a community garden. So this talks about the interior. This talks like, this is like, minimalism. This is like, there's a stovetop refrigerator. This is like self-reliance. So all of these little pieces should tie into a tenant or an overarching concept like one of your dinos. If you look over here, we have a communal garden, nature trails, recycling. That all has to do with that divinity and nature situation. And then this is my explanation of my tenets in the brochure. So I'm like, hey, here's how my brochure follows the transcendental tenets. So this is, the brochure has a simple, clean look. So that's minimalist. The brochure claims no excess decor or statement pieces. That shows that they're minimalist. It also displays self-reliant. It also says it has a sink, a stovetop, and a refrigerator. This shows that they don't need assistance from other people. Lower cost of living, higher quality of life, more time to live. That's the idea of experience over logic, etc. So I gave 3 different ways that my brochure tied into the transcendentalists. And then this is my synthesis paragraph that you and I just went over. And remember, I'm using a song here. You are not using a song. You are using the article and the infographic that's on your It's Learning page for today. So that is my example, and all of those are all together, and that's what you're going to submit all together. So this is what your final project is going to look like. All right, so there's one final thing that I want to talk to you about is on this, your summative project that you have all these things linked in, it does also say template options. And if you click on that, it will take you to a bunch of links. And these are Canva options that you can use to make your tiny house brochure. This is a template that you can work from. So I'm just going to open one just so you get an idea of what you're working with. You can absolutely choose something else. But just for the sake of you guys having speed and getting all of this finished and accomplished in a timely manner, I wanted to give you an option of what one looks like. All right, one final thing. So I opened one of those. This is what pops up when you open it. You just want to use the template, and then you will have Canva will open for you, and then it'll open in a way that you can start editing and creating your own brochure. So if you see this right here, this is what your template would look like. You can interchange any of this out and change the font. You can change out any of these pictures and add your own information wherever you would like to write your own information. Now, once you finish with this, you're going to have to make this into a JPEG, which is basically a picture file, and then you will need to paste that into a Google Slides, right? I made a picture file of page 1. I made a picture file of page 2. If you click on this, you can see that like this is just a picture that I've just, you see what I'm saying? Like that, I just made a picture out of it and I just stretched it over my whole slide. And then I put my other 2 things on the same slide, okay? So that's all you need to know for your project. Come see me if you need any help. Of course, I'm always here to help if you need anything. Happy transcendental writing, my friends.